All right, can I have all of my guests unmute? Hello, everyone. Welcome to VR and Game Devs Breakdown. This is a podcast where we break down and analyze both normal games as well as VR games in the future when I upgrade my computer. But for now, we're kind of sticking with these more non-traditional non-VR titles, I guess. So today we're taking a look at Katana Zero, and I'd like to introduce our special guest, Granger Martin, on the first hand. And Granger is a big fan of this game, as I was just informed earlier, and he is also really talented when it comes to creating pixel art. So, Granger, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then I'll introduce everyone else.
Hi, I'm Granger. I'm a game artist, usually 3D game artist, but pixel art is kind of like a secret passion and hobby of mine. I love taking a look at indie games that utilize it in strange and unique ways. And Katana Zero is one of my favorites. It really balances the game design and the pixel art very well.
Well, great. Thank you. I'd also like to say hello to Anthony. I'm glad you could join us. Anthony is our
How's it
consumer.
going?
He's our consumer specialist, so he'll point out anything that we miss because he's not a game designer. Therefore, he is a lot less forgiving of flaws when it comes to video games. He's also one of our new co-hosts. So, Anthony, welcome to your official first show as a co-host. I'd also like to introduce my other co-hosts, Joesph Janssen and Xavier Rodriguez. Both are VR developers and technical artists like myself. And, I'd just also like to thank Anthony for pre-recording the game footage that we're going to be analyzing today. So, thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. My pleasure.
All right. And so I'm just going to start the gameplay, and then we're going to kind of talk about game design, art, and we're also going to talk about what to think about when creating a pixel art or retro game. That's the main question of the podcast today. So let's just get right into that. And I would say that first observation that I had of this game when I played it a few months ago was like, wow. So this is the kind of game we're getting into. We've got a very retro style and music's on point. And I think that the main thing that Ekisoft was stressing when they were talking about creating this game was like, okay, we're going to have this game. It's a retro style. We're going to have a very high skill ceiling, but we're also going to have a low enough skill floor for a reasonable amount of players to get into it. And then we're going to really stress that soundtrack to keep people into the game. And that really lends to the immersion. And Xavier, you've recently just played this game for the first time about an hour ago. So I'm just kind of curious as to what your initial observations were and what you thought about it.
Yeah, I would say that the thing about Katana Zero is this is exactly my type of game. Now, up to this point, we've been focusing a lot on like a lot of first-person titles, like modern-day first-person titles, and I think there's definitely an appreciation to be had for those types of games. But when it comes to what I'm interested in, fast-paced 2D action is something that I can always get down with, whether it be like a more action combat title like Katana Zero, or maybe something a bit older like a Ninja Gaiden of sorts, or whether it's more along the shooter side of things like a Mega Man and whatnot. So as soon as I started playing, I knew immediately that I was going to love this game, and I was right. This game is great. It's really fun to play. Love that interaction where you can like hold Y to pet the cat. That's a great little bit of character detail there.
Well,
Yeah,
I think when it comes to the actual gameplay loop as well, we have this really interesting concept where the player character sits down and he basically looks forward into the future and he sees all possible situations when he's gonna go through a combat or platforming section, and then these all play in his head as possible ways around certain issues, and then in real time it plays on that camera of you actually doing it. And I think that's interesting because, obviously this player's special ability is that he's on this like special drug that allows him to see into the future, Chronos. And it's definitely one of the more like a different game mechanic, I'd say. I haven't really seen anything like it, and I don't play a lot of retro or pixel art games, but I don't think that this is unique to that. I think that this is just a very unique gameplay loop that happens to just be in this genre. And then I know that Anthony, you were the one who recorded this footage, so what were your kind of initial reactions when you were in this beginning section, as well as kind of learning how to play the game?
So, when you first told me I had to play this game, I was like, oh great, it's just some random pixely game. It's gonna be easy. And then this is actually not my first run through it. I was like, let me just try a few rounds of it, and I kind of became addicted to like trying to figure out how to actually like get through levels, because there's a lot of strategy to it, and it's way harder than it looks. Like, you mess up once or you get hit, you're dead, and it doesn't matter if you even like finish a boss fight and like you kill off the boss. If you're running back and hit a laser, it resets the whole level. So like getting through stuff like that was actually like really hard and really frustrating at times, because at first I really didn't know how to use all the abilities the correct way, or like know how to slow time and shoot bullets back. Even I was just trying to avoid like being hit, and then when you kind of figure that out, it becomes a little easier and you start realizing you can have some fun with it. So,
Yeah, and I think it definitely makes you feel like you're really good once you get into it. Granger, you played this game a few years ago. You mentioned like around the time it came out, and I know we have you on here to talk about pixel art, but I'd also like to get your kind of reaction to the gameplay loop. And of course, we can talk about the narrative a little bit later down the line in this episode, but I'd kind of like to just get your opinion on, what do you think of the game mechanics in play, and how do they lend themselves to create this very polished and complete experience?
Yeah, of course. I love games that take inspiration not just from games themselves, but from movies. And I feel like I don't know much about the devs' intent, but the way I see it, it looks like they just were really inspired by old action movies and tried to make the player not just have things that mimicked the way that those abilities looked in those movies, but try to make the player really feel like they're in an action movie. So you got the slow-mo, you got the reflecting bullets, you got hanging up your phone. Like, you can do that to other characters. Like, you have old games like Ninja Gaiden, which that's pretty cool, but it didn't really make you feel like a ninja. This is smooth, it's quick. Like, if you just watched a regular playthrough, it would feel very similar to an action movie, and I feel like the player also feels that.
I would like to jump on that and say this is probably one of the only games that I could just sit and watch a playthrough of and still feel like it's worth my time. It's very cathartic to watch someone who's good at this game play this game. So nice skills, Anthony. You clearly got the gameplay loop down. I'm proud of you. But
I die a couple times. So,
yeah, but I think
proud.
that when I said high skill ceiling, low skill floor, this is easy to figure out within the first few levels how you're meant to play this game and what you're kind of supposed to do. But I think there's still a lot of gameplay options for a player who either wants to do a speed run or someone who wants to play for story or go for a credit run. And I think it supports a lot of different play styles and different tactics when you're playing this game. And I genuinely enjoy when a game kind of allows me to explore my own methods of navigating a level. And that's not something I usually see when I play a retro game. Normally there's a pretty preset path, and I'm supposed to follow that path in order to get the end goal, fight the boss, save the princess, and beat the game. But this takes some more modern game design tropes, and it gives us more of a choice. And I think that's what adds to the strategy of the experience and makes it so addicting. Like you said, Anthony, is we're given a choice with every single situation how we're going to handle it and what's the best method of attack. And there's a lot of different things set around a specific level to give us a wide variation of options for what we need to do.
Yes. So to play off that too, even back to that receptionist scene. So the first time I totally just ignored her and I just kind of made her angry. And once you get through the stage and you're walking back out, when I was walking back out, she was like, "That's the guy. This is the guy who I end up murdering all these people, obviously." So she like calls me out, and then I have to do like a whole nother stage essentially. Where this time I played it cool, and then she liked me. She never said anything about them. She said I was clear, and then I was able to just walk out of the level. So there's like stuff that you do in the game that directly affects like the difficulty essentially of it, which is.
And I love that engaging in that 5-minute conversation at the beginning saves you from a fight at the end. Because if you were to just ignore her or tell her to shut up, you're going to have to fight the police officers that show up at the end of the level, to confront you for the murder. But instead, she defends you as a cosplayer, which I find hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know that there was more to the level if you decided to like be rude to her. Just because when I first played it, the way I played as the character is that I was kind of like trying to be nice, be very respectful, because even though there are options where you can basically like abruptly end the conversation, it just wasn't how I wanted to play as the character. And
Yeah,
so
and I think that the game makes you want to be like that. I think that they established this character who's broken. He's got PTSD from the war, and he's being kind of manipulated by his therapist to commit these assassinations. And it's not necessarily something I think he wants to do. I think it's just what he's meant to do. And so I noticed myself playing in that same way, where I tried to be as kind to everyone around me as possible in order, and I only killed who I had to. And I think that, you know, the game kind of just puts you into that mindset of like, this is a misunderstood character. He's not this absolute murdering machine that he's painted to be. I guess is how I feel about the game, especially when I watch gameplay and when I played through the story myself. I chose the good ending because that's who I felt the character was meant to be. And honestly, if anyone else did it differently, I'd love to hear kind of your perspective. Because for all I know, Granger played like a total psychopath run.
Yeah, that's usually how I do it. I don't think I ever let a conversation line run. I usually just hung up or just interrupted.
Well,
I like the fact that the game gives you that option to kind of play how you want. So for the people that kind of want to take their time, they're allowed to like wait the conversations out, and so they're given like a little bit of like more docile, nicer things that they can possibly say for the character. And then for the people that just do not care about the story and they just want to get to the next action set piece, they also have the option to kind of like hurry up the conversation and get moving back into the gameplay as quickly as possible.
Now, Granger, forgive me for this assumption, but I'm going to paint kind of myself onto you real quick and say, as a game designer, you have a very limited amount of time to actually research games. Therefore, you really only spend probably an hour per title that you want to take a look at. And then you have games that you're just a fan of that you will play till completion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just wondering, was this one of your games that you played because you just are like were a fan of it, or you played because it was like a research thing for your art?
I played it just because like I heard nice things about it. There's games that like it's a good genre, that indie like game design focused pixel art, because when you use pixel art, it's very low scope. That's how you know they can spend a lot of time designing a good game. Celeste was a very similar title where it was a platformer, but it was still they polished the gameplay. And this game, like, really, there's no stops. So usually I'll get bored with the game if there's like tutorials or like a lot of heavy dialogue, like a lot of breaks in the narrative. This game, you're really controlling the narrative. So there's no real part for me to step back and say like, okay, this has kind of lost me, because the player's the driving force throughout the entire game.
And I really like that when that is the case with games, and those are my favorite types of games, when that character is someone you can relate to and you genuinely care about. Whereas if they're just a body that you're using as a vessel to explore a world or vent some frustration with real life, I think that this game does a really good job of telling you like, hey, you're playing as this person and they have thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and you influence how they react to those.
Yeah, and kind of thing that's incredible about that too is that it's all user chosen. Like there's no like you kind of get to make the decision for the character, and because you're allowed to make the choices yourself, I think that makes it easier for you to attach yourself to this character, because in a sense you are this person, even though you're just controlling him with like a Xbox 360 controller or just with like a keyboard, you still kind of feel like you're embodying this person because you're responding how you want to. It's not kind of taken out of your control, so he can go off and do his own thing.
Just to interrupt real quick, guys, if anyone in the audience has a question for any of us, feel free to ask it in the chat, and we will get to all questions, by the end of the stream, hopefully. So just feel free to throw those into the chat. We don't have any right now. We just have Rolling saying hi. So hi, Rolling. How you doing? Thanks for watching. But
yes, we very much appreciate your viewership.
Back to our breakdown. Let's get into these vignette sequences where he's talking to his therapist, and we have a complete tonal shift between the cyberpunky levels, and then we go into this office playing classical music as he's talking about his personal life and his last few assignments and how they've affected him, and then he gets his drug that helps him with his abilities. So I just want to know, like, kind of what your general opinion is on that, Granger, as well as anyone else in the chat. Like, what's your opinion on these break sequences between the action?
It's always a good time. Like this game is nonstop, like I was talking about. So when you pull back, when you have that contrast, it really shows. So like, yeah, and I was saying taking from film, right? There's a fireplace. Usually, if two people sitting in a fireplace, that's like an introspection scene. Everything's slowed down, like warmer colors. Neo noir is usually cooler neon colors. They're really like this part seems like an antithesis to the rest of the game, which makes sense because it's sort of like a therapy office for him. Um,
Yeah,
I think it was very well done.
You know, I noticed that when you're talking about this game, you do bring a lot of references from film. The biggest reference for me for this game is Lone Wolf and Cub, the films and TV series from, I want to say the 70s, 60s, 70s, and then I think there was a reboot in the 80s. I'm just wondering, are you familiar with that series, and do you have any other films that you can see a direct influence on this game coming from?
This might be a more mainstream reference, but I think a lot about Blade Runner. I'm not too familiar with Lone Wolf and Cub, but I'd love to know more about it.
Well, that Lone Wolf and Cub is just it's just a classic samurai. It started as a graphic novel, and then it became a film, and then it became a TV show, right? And it's just about this father who's a samurai and his son, and the father is an executioner for the emperor or whatever. I'm not getting the story completely correct here, but and he gets betrayed by a rival clan, and then he goes on a revenge quest after his wife is killed. So like I see this kind of lone samurai in the main character of this game and the main character of Lone Wolf and Cub. But when you said Blade Runner, that was interesting. Are you talking more of like the setting kind of reminds you of Blade Runner, or would you say some of the combat and characters remind you of Blade Runner?
I think it just like when you have that kind of neon, like neon is supposed to be an exciting, it was made to be like an appealing thing, but when you give a cynical lens to it and you put it in the future, it gives me a very Blade Runner vibe just because it feels, even though it's so colorful and they're dancing and stuff, it also feels very brutal and hopeless.
I really like that observation, and I can definitely feel that, which is kind of draws back to the tonal shift between that therapist's office and then these more linear levels where we have these very cold stone settings that are definitely not friendly, right? And then we have this office which is also not friendly, but you're safe. For now, at least, is kind of the vibe that I get from them. They're little vibe checks in between the action, per se. Now, Joe, I don't mean to pick on you, but I have not heard anything from you during the stream, so I'd just like to get your general opinion on kind of the loop you're seeing with the gameplay, or maybe some of the mechanics that you're noticing, and kind of how those speak to you from a design standpoint.
Yeah, no, I was just watching the stream and kind of absorbing the gameplay just to kind of get a better estimate of like what the game is about, and kind of just calling back to Granger's idea concept where it relates to Blade Runner. Sorry, I could definitely see that here, and that was one of the comments I was gonna say, but like I didn't want to interrupt your discussion earlier. And it definitely draws back to like with the neo noir aesthetic, and I do definitely like that comment you have where it's like with the antithesis of these like psychology like break rooms where it pulls back on the gameplay and slows everything down. And I'm also just curious, so with these, could we kind of talk a bit more about the real-time dialogue? We only talked about it like for a brief second, but I wanted to kind of hear more.
Well, do you have like a follow-up question for that, like something we could focus in on with that? Because there's a lot to that dialogue system that we see in gameplay, and I'm sure Xavier, Anthony, or I or Granger could probably answer your question. Just is there anything specific?
I guess I would say if we could go back to that
Yeah, do you want to? We can move back on the stream. So hold on, I'll just move us back to here. So what are you kind of curious about here?
I was just like, because I know you can like from what I see with the dialogue choices, I know you can like interrupt the psychologist whenever you like.
So that drops. Go ahead.
Or go-
Sorry.
Does that just directly affect the story overall? And, like,
Yeah.
you'll get missing
Well,
information.
I would say that it affects the information you receive, and then in some cases, yes, it will affect the narrative. Like with Anthony talking about the receptionist scene that we were in earlier, where he told the receptionist that he was a cosplayer, and then he was able to walk past the receptionist area and then into the level where he slaughtered all the people. And then on his way out, he was confronted by that police officer. And the receptionist was like, oh, no, he's a cosplayer. It's fine. And then you got to leave without having to fight that cop. So, yeah, skipping the dialogue will lead to scenarios where you could have skipped combat altogether, or you could have had unique dialogue choices that led to I think, even different levels at times, depending on the choices that you make. So the dialogue does have a direct effect on the story as well as gameplay, too, right? So if you didn't want to hear from this doctor, you could just say, I'd like my medicine now, and it cuts off the therapy session, and then you move on to the next level. And you can say that at the beginning of the session. But what happens in these therapy sessions is we're learning more about the recurring dream that the player character keeps having, where he's having this nightmare, and then as the game progresses, we're getting more and more of the nightmare, like more and more of the nightmare becomes clearer to both the player and the player character. And if we were to interrupt these sessions, we wouldn't actually get that insight that we would get otherwise. So that's the effect that the dialogue has in the story. And then you also usually will have a conversation with each of your assassination contacts, and you can cut those off and just kill them, or you can hear them out to like hear what they say. And Anthony wanted to kind of get us to a lot of different levels so we could see the art, so he cut off most of those, and he killed the targets like he was supposed to, because that's what the game told him to do. So, you know, we could explore more of that in the future, but good question, man. I'm going to move us past this segment again, back to around the area that we were in.
Yeah. So something I really like about this game is it's difficult and it's punishing, but not in a poorly designed way, you know, because like we talked about before how this game has elements that are clearly taking from like retro 80s titles, you know, as earlier mentioned, like Mega Man, Mario, Ninja Gaiden, all those titles. The thing about those games is you have 3 lives basically to complete kind of like the level. And if you don't complete the level with those 3 lives, you either have to restart the level, or in some cases, like the original Mario, you just have to restart like the entire game.
Yeah, you gotta restart the entire game. And I would say that lives have a place, but at this point with most games, they're a very outdated form of game design, because lives were designed to get more quarters out of players in arcades, whereas on console we buy the game once, so us having to restart the game a bunch of times is just going to stop us from playing it most likely, because we'll get frustrated. But back when arcades were very prominent and that's where people went to play games, the main goal was to have enough stops in gameplay and kill the player enough where they would have to spend more money to beat the game.
Yeah,
so,
and the reason that it carried over into the NES era is because a lot of these titles were very short. Like, once you know what you're doing with Mario, you can beat the game in only a couple minutes. And so, you know, in order to make the game worth its value, because a lot of these games would be sold for like 30 to 40 bucks, they would have it so, you know, they were either relentlessly difficult or they just limited how many lives you had, so that you would have to play these stages over and over in order to, you know, in order to fully beat them.
And spend more quarters every time. So we're making it's a money making trick, right? You know, they have to make money somehow, and that's how they did it. While we're on this level, I'm sorry to cut this part off, but I just wanted to get everyone's opinion on these environmental tools and mechanics that allow us to beat the level. So, for example, Anthony just activated that laser system that allowed him to kill all of the guards standing up there in his way. What is your opinion on that? And I'll just state mine right away. I think that when you can use the environment to your advantage in any game, it adds to the immersion and how real the environment feels and how much of a presence the player will actually feel in the environment. And I think that this game does a really good job of that, with a lot of the throwables that are put around, a lot of the environmental hazards that we can actually weaponize and turn against the enemies. Those are really cool.
This part is so frustrating. I'm sorry. I just
Anthony, trust me, I just played this. I got stuck on this level so many times.
Yeah, it's that thing. Like, every single time you get to that... Sorry to interrupt you, Quinn. Like, just completely throwing off the stream. But, like, it is so frustrating because you have to restart from the very bottom, and it actually is, like, obnoxious.
And I think that's where that kind of challenge comes in, and as well as utilizing the map to your advantage. Because once you started using that laser gun, you were able to clear because you just cleared there, or you're almost about to clear, right? So
I hope so.
well, no, you died. But
Because I even reflected it. It doesn't do damage because you have to hit like the AB so that you dodge the bullets, and it's just like there's something in my brain that didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
well, I think it's muscle memory is like a main part of what makes you good at the game.
Yeah. Well, it's also it's in retrospect that I'm just noticing that you don't actually have to fight any of the enemies on the top side. I just noticed that there's a wooden plank underneath where the final enemy is, so you can just jump, break the plank, and then you can just skip this entire section.
Wow.
I know, it's pretty disturbing.
Yeah, but you don't even realize it because you're so kind of like caught up and focused on the challenge ahead that you're not really thinking about taking shortcuts. You're just trying to kind of get past the obstacle that's in front of you.
Well, you still have to kill all the enemies in a level to pass. So either way, Anthony would have had to go and kill all those enemies, but he would have had the drop on them.
Yeah, and I wouldn't also be shot by that turret either, though. So that's totally true. It would have made it way easier if I would have just noticed that.
Back to that initial discussion, though. I mean, what's everyone's opinion on the map elements aiding to the gameplay?
I think with just general sandbox elements that they can add to the gameplay loop, it's for the better. I mean, this is what the Halo series has done very well, especially with the Bungie era of games, whereas like they would like tactfully place items that either you could interact with the environment or like unique interactables that will change the level layout. Whereas like with the 343 Industries era, like they've kind of put more emphasis on player abilities and not so much on the sandbox environment and how you can use that to your strategy. So seeing that here, it's something that I've always enjoyed in game design, is having just more options besides your own, avatar skill set to overcome various obstacles.
That's a really good observation, man. What do you think, Granger?
I think it's one of those great decisions in gameplay where it extends beyond its own moment, right? Because that laser puzzle happens, and you're going to think about stuff like that every time you play every other stage, even if something like that doesn't return, because you'll know, okay, if I pay attention to the environment, I'll benefit from it. And if you're having a hard time with the game, you'll be looking at environmental clues. So it's one of those things that it's such a small thing that they added, but it's so insightful. And once the player notices it, they'll look at the environment completely differently.
Yeah, and I think it encourages you to kind of analyze before you attack. So it gives you a chance to kind of like, I would say that every level for me had a scouting run where I would just try and get as far as possible and see what my options were. And even if I was going to beat it, I would actually go back and then try and replay it again, but utilizing the elements to my advantage. Even though you're not getting a score for how well you perform in these levels, I still wanted to have the best possible style. I thought it was more fun that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say too, like with the like bottles or knives or whatever that you can pick up, when I was doing my first playthrough, I didn't realize immediately that I actually had to like physically aim with them. It didn't just auto lock onto targets, which I think added some just difficulty to the game in general, because at points I wouldn't be paying attention where I was aiming and I'd throw something
and it'd go
and then it
way.
would just completely throw me off and then I would fail the stage.
That's unfortunate, but
Right.
I've been there where it's I do a quick turnaround to make sure there's not an enemy behind me, and then I throw my only chance of survival the wrong way, and then I just have to watch my character die. So
yeah, I think it's a really cool game mechanic too in general, because it constantly makes you like aware of where you're actually looking with your mouse as you're going through the stage.
I think this is another, just to jump to a different topic and kind of call back to that therapist session, this is another kind of vignette, and I just want to draw a comparison with the save rooms in the Resident Evil series, which we covered last week on the podcast, but I think that these are kind of the same feel, where you're safe here for now, but the action is still there for you to experience. But these are these moments of reprise where you kind of have a chance to relax a little bit before you get to the next level. So I think the apartment and the therapist session scenes, while they're slow, I think they're very necessary for the overall game.
Yeah. Well, because when you're playing a game like this where it's like it's constant fast-paced action during like the main levels, you need to have a moment where you can just kind of like relax and not have to like always be on edge. That's a good thing to kind of have for players, just so that they don't get tired too fast. Because that's something I've noticed about a title, say like Devil May Cry 5. Devil May Cry 5. Great title, but it's kind of hard to play through for an extended period of time because it's no fat, all action, basically throughout the entire title. So I think it was a really good decision on this game's part to kind of have story moments where you're just kind of relaxing, you're taking in a bit of the setting, and you're learning more about the bit of the character. So there's like it's not like you're not doing anything, you know, you're learning more about these people as you're doing it. I think it adds a lot to the title, its inclusion.
I agree. Sorry, I got kind of quiet there. I completely agree with what you're saying.
Oh,
Oh,
oh.
when you're getting hacked.
About these therapy session scenes, also, like you look at that room, because I was talking about it's a contrast. Now it's like a break from the frantic action, but it's still warm colors and it's still intense, and you have the fire in the background. So it was a specific decision. So it's not like a calming area; it's just different, and it makes you suspicious also.
Yeah, there's an element. There's like an element of unease underneath like the warmth of the fire in a sense.
Yeah.
Like for now it's kind of like a calm before the storm. That is the storm being these levels. But in the future, that might change throughout. I mean, I don't know personally because I didn't get that far in the narrative, but I could see that happening in the future.
So sorry about the quietness there. I got logged out of the streaming program that I used to put it on multiple platforms. So when Anthony said I was getting hacked, I actually kind of was. So we're good now. We're logged back in. So keep going. Sorry about that, guys.
No problem. So the stream is still running?
Yeah, no,
fine?
we're set. We're fine. I have it open on another computer to make sure. So we're still live.
Yeah,
I don't know
okay.
what that was about.
And how it's like putting you in his shoes almost, because it's supposed to be a calming area. It's not because of the warm, intense colors, and that's how he probably feels. I mean, therapy for a PTSD-ridden samurai guy is not going to be very pleasant. He doesn't like revisiting this stuff.
Yeah, it's hard for the character, and you can infer that just from the different dialogue choices, because throughout the entire conversation that you're having with the therapist, there's always that option to just like end the conversation, and it's kind of always pressing you kind of like urgently, like, hey, I just want my medicine and I just want to get out. And it's kind of up to the player to decide whether they want to keep this character in an uncomfortable state, or if they want if they want to do what might be even best for this person. Does he have a name also? I'm kind of curious about that.
It's Zero.
Zero. Okay.
I completely forgot it, so I've just been referring to him as a player character. The name isn't mentioned that much. I mean, known by everyone else in the game universe or the world that he inhabits, he's known as the Dragon. Or at least the attacks that he had. There's actually another character that's really the Dragon, but he is called the Dragon as well, and it's a point of confusion for everyone.
I see. I
think there's one mechanic, and this was shown in one of the previous levels, but I like this attention to detail. But like, if we study, for example, like that club scene where you can kind of like blend in and do like social stealth with the crowds, and like you can kind of do that here. And these aren't like specifically social like stealth sections, like you can kind of just dip into a portion of the environment and hide. But I think that's a great touch, just because that was a successful strategy that that was seen in the early Assassin's Creed games, and it was nice to kind of see that touch in here as well, where like I could blend in with like these silhouette crowds, and you would become a part of it to like navigate your way through like different obstacles and enemies, and you could avoid killing them entirely.
Yeah, I just like sequences like that in games, and they can get old very fast, but it's nice when if the game's designed well, those are really nice reprieves from the standard gameplay loop. And Anthony, technically in this scene you're not supposed to be killing people, but
I can't help it. I'm sorry.
I like how you're just trying to jump back and forth between these rooms as well.
Right. I was trying to get around him because he spotted me, and I was like, I wonder if I just keep slipping in this room, if he's eventually just gonna walk by me, and he ended up doing it. So I was like, sweet. So I'm wondering though, what would it take for an 8-bit game to like completely blow up? Like, I'm not saying the next Fortnite or anything, but just become like so massively played by people that it almost becomes like a thing like people bring up in conversation, like Call of Duty or something like that. What would it take for an 8-bit game to be played?
I think honestly, this is a great question for every single person in this chat, but I would say from my perspective that it has to have a really solid gameplay loop, and if you wanted to create an 8-bit game that kind of lived up to that, this is one of those games that's very highly regarded, and a lot of people talk about when they're talking about kind of retro style, or as we're calling it more unprofessionally, 8-bit games. It's due to its gameplay, and I would say that a lot of retro games have a certain level of challenge that make them very fun to play, and they keep people coming back to them. There's a big replayability value there, and I think another game that does that really well that's a retro / 8-bit game is Hotline Miami. So has anyone in the chat ever played Hotline Miami? Yeah. So Granger, I haven't actually played it, but I know of it. Do you think that that's another one of those games that was designed kind of in a way and has certain things you could talk about that were the reason it kind of blew up and was so popular, to kind of answer Anthony's question?
It echoes, I mean, this game came out later and it was probably somewhat inspired by the success of Hotline Miami, but it's one of those things that what really makes games jump off and really get popular is the appeal, which usually happens when you combine like this art style with the gameplay, where it all kind of comes together in a unique way. The really only like indie games are hitting right now because they'll just take one mechanic that's really good and they'll polish it as much as possible. A lot of AAA games, they try to make a lot of mechanics because they need to, develop it for a while, make it exciting for trailers and stuff. But for these games, they can just take one mechanic, one aesthetic almost, because I'm pretty sure Hotline Miami had a similar like 80s retro look, and also similarly brutal in its violence. You're just running into buildings and killing people. And it was also a very sandbox game similar to this, where you can go about it in a means of ways. But just that concentration in the game design is, I think, what hooks people, because you pick it up and there's, like Xavier was talking about earlier, there's just no fat, it just goes. And it just, like, it feels like art that way, at least the way it's designed.
Yeah, and it's definitely like a really great subgenre. And I would say that a lot of the times when I want to break up some games that I'm studying with just something fun that I can sit down and play, like you said, with not a lot of fat, it just goes. You plug it in and you're playing. I would say that retro games are kind of the first titles I like to go to for that, because it gives you a really good dose of challenge with a lot of times a really cool art style. And most recent retro styled games have really good soundtracks. Like Hotline Miami had an amazing soundtrack, so does Katana Zero. So that's something that I noticed with these games as well. Xavier, what would you say? Because I know that you're a big fan of games with challenge. Do you think that is like a make or break feature of a lot of retro games, is the level of challenge within them?
See, I'm trying to think about it, because I don't necessarily think a retro game needs to be challenging in order to be successful. But I do think that a lot of the appeal in regards to retro games can come as a result of difficulty, because I haven't ever played Hotline Miami, but I've watched people play Hotline Miami, and I've seen that it's very easy to die in that game and to have to restart the level. That gameplay loop of like go in, clear a couple rooms, die, go back in, try to do things a little bit differently, make a little bit of progress, die again. Like that kind of repetitive thing is also a present staple in that indie title, in this one specifically. But I also think of a game like Undertale, because Undertale is one of the most successful new age 8-bit indie games kind of the past 5 years. And I don't think the appeal of Undertale is necessarily its difficulty. I think the appeal of Undertale is kind of its unique twist on an old style of gameplay, and on more specifically like the story and the characters. I think that's what makes that title successful. So I think it just kind of depends, or I think it just kind of depends on like what it is you're trying to go for and what you're trying to say with your indie title, and just kind of hoping that it's a message that like a large group of people can resonate with, whether that be through intense unforgiving action or through a really unique spin on something that's kind of become old, and just interesting characters that you can relate to and enjoy watching.
There's also like a I'll do it myself kind of attitude that a lot of these games similarly have, where all of them are uniquely games that are either risky or just not grandiose enough for a AAA studio to develop them. And I think that's partially why they've become so successful, is just because they're so unique in that way.
Yeah, there's also like I don't, yeah, there's something I think that's really appealing about that kind of style of like when you can tell that a very small team of people worked on it. It just makes the game, I don't know, something about it. It just feels more appealing as a result. I think because the messaging or like the intent is a bit clearer because less people are working on it. More of their input is put into the game. That might be like a reason why.
To add on to that, I mean, especially with this being an indie company, like there's a lot less for them to lose because this is their first like quote unquote title. So like they don't have an expectation predetermined for them, where if it was like a different AAA game, so like they can be a bit more ambitious with like what do they want to include in the game. So, and if something doesn't work, they'll just move on to the next thing that is successful.
Yeah, I would agree. Sorry to interrupt, but
I just wanted to say, like, kind of after we're done wrapping up this discussion, I would like to move over into kind of a little bit more of an art topic, since we do have Granger here, so we could ask him a few more questions about kind of like when it comes to creating art for a game like this, what is his process? But go ahead and finish this process, and then Granger, feel free to answer that question when it finishes.
Yeah, but I was just gonna say with Joe that I would agree that because there's less stakes to most of these titles in the sense of like they're not already under these pre-established big name studios, so there's just a bit more creative license with what can be included in these titles. Yeah, I think that just lends itself to offer kind of a unique perspective that you wouldn't get from like a Ubisoft or from an EA and from a Bethesda and whatnot.
Yeah, no predetermined climb up these towers to unlock the map.
Yep, not gonna see that here.
What were you gonna say?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the game's needs, but looking at this game, even looking at this shot right now, really what is important is the color blocking and just the colors in general, which I'm assuming that's what they decided first before developing any of these assets, is what are the colors, what's the tone of the scene. This is technically a cutscene right here, so they wanted to set the mood with this train car. And the great thing about pixel art is that this is kind of a large scope narrative. If you had this on paper, you'd look at this like, I don't know how an indie game can create this if you didn't know the genre. But since it's pixel art, each sprite and the animations can be done way quicker. You can have a lot more characters, a lot more action, have a lot more animation, and it'll all be packed in. It can be made by an indie company. I think that's the magic of pixel art, is that you can develop these games. The appeal is exactly the same, if not more, by having pixel art. But it's still subtraction, so it's simpler than developing like 3D assets, and even like this small stuff too, like the text shaking. Like you couldn't do that on the NES. You can only shake the screen vertically, but here it's like, now that we're in the modern age, you can shake all the text all you want. And I think reduction, as much like it's really an art of balancing, like, okay, we're in 2021 now. If you're going to make pixel art, what was art like before and what did they do? And what can you do now with pixel art now that we have new technology, and balance the two?
Do you have a kind of an example of what we can do now that we really couldn't do then?
Yeah, I was listening. So Shovel Knight was a recent. Shovel Knight was truer, I think, to 8-bit than most games. But their developers were talking, and they're talking about like there's quote unquote rules that they broke, and they're talking about screen shake, which they broke because this game does it too. Screen shake, where it adds a lot to the action, especially to a pixel-based game. But on the NES, it was slow and also could only happen vertically. And let's see. I think like it really depends on like. Well, I'm sorry. What was the question again?
I was basically asking kind of you mentioned that we're in 2021 now, so there's a lot more
Yeah.
we can do with pixel art that we could not do when all games looked like this or similar to this. And I was just kind of curious as to what you meant by that when you said kind of, oh, we can do a lot more now. Are you just saying as for overall resolution, we just have a lot more pixels to push art into while sticking to that style?
Right. Okay. So it's a little bit more complicated because, like, we obviously have a lot more resolution, but the real magic of it is that we also have more sprites we can load in. Because okay, this is a great example right here. That minecart, right? I think it's an obvious kind of homage to Donkey Kong Country, but in Donkey Kong Country it was not that smooth. Here they've rotoscoped like a 3D object, and we have the technology to do that now, where they're pretty much following like 60 frames per second. This minecart animation is very smooth and very appealing.
Wow, nice
but
eye,
obviously
man.
Yeah, with Donkey Kong though, it's like I was watching that back because I was thinking about these scenes because, like, you look at that minecart, it's like enamoring almost how smooth it is. And Donkey Kong had a similar thing. They're also using 3D objects, but those had to be rendered beforehand. And they can only draw so many sprites. So this just feels like kind of a flexing of like what we can do currently.
No, that's wow. I never even thought about that. And I haven't played Donkey Kong, that's Donkey Kong Country that you're speaking of, right?
Yeah, the SNES games.
Okay, yeah, and that I remember that game looked really good for its time. If I have read the Nintendo Power magazines correctly, but
I mean, yeah, I mean that game was revolutionary for the time. The pre-rendered sprites of that game, I mean they kind of defined how you could make a 3D or a 2D image look like it's three-dimensional. So the impact that Donkey Kong Country had artistically on gaming, like it cannot be understated.
I'm just watching Anthony. I was just watching the gameplay here, and I'm like, wow, this is really challenging to have to manage the location of the card as well as the location of our player. And I'm kind of like, wow, Anthony, good job. You did it on the first try.
No. It
Pro
took a
player.
couple goes, but hey. Honestly, watch it back, I'm like, dude, I'm trash.
It'd be fun to see someone who's just played probably 50 hours of this game go on their umpteenth playthrough. That'd definitely be interesting to see. I just wanted to say to everyone in the audience one more time that if you have any questions, feel free to throw them right into the chat and we will get to them. I have a direct line to see any possible comments that could be posted. Back to kind of what we were covering before, Granger. When it comes to the kind of different settings we have, and this is a very interesting part of the game where we're in this a bunch of different movie sets, all with different themes overlapping, but the overall style of the game is still pretty concise. Do you think that that would be difficult to do, or is creating like a pixel art with one converging style but different themes, is that a kind of a difficult thing to think about, similar to when we're creating 3D assets in 3D games? Or is there a little bit less of an overlap where one is easier than the other?
I would say I think they both have their equal challenges. I think when you have pixel art, you can get away with a lot less. The colors have to be really, really strong. With 3D, we can add a lot of noise. There's a lot of stuff, like we can throw a lot of things in to kind of distract from shortcomings. But with pixel art, it's kind of exposed. But the benefit of pixel art is obviously you can make assets a lot quicker. You can make all these environments, like reuse. I'm pretty sure like this wall kit is kind of used all throughout the game, but they can throw all these pixel art assets on top of it to make it look a lot different.
These assets are just PNGs, right? So we just create sections like it's a mod kit?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, you have to set, I think the challenging part is you really have to set a scale. And also the map has to be pretty solid at first. because you don't, moving the stuff around it. Even though the space is like nonsensical, obviously, because it's 2D pixel art, you still want it to look somewhat believable, and weird placement still kind of stands out.
Yeah, where we have just these floating rooms in a black void.
Yeah.
And that's just something I think that the average player doesn't even notice. I mean, if the level looks good enough, they're not even going to care, right?
You have to run through it so fast, so they're smart, obviously. Pixel art, everything can be really modular, and you get away with it because you're running through these rooms so quick. If they did take a lot of time to make, it would be kind of wasteful.
Because it doesn't matter. Not most players aren't even gonna you're not gonna run back through the section after you kill the enemies. You're just going to leave.
Yeah, you just ran past that rainbow room.
Which is why they're using broad
sure.
colors and a very minimal style, because it doesn't matter.
Watching myself even run through these levels too, it's like I will just never slow down. I'm just like, no, I'm going to do this as fast as possible. I don't care.
I think that's everyone who plays this game, though. Even me, who often plays games specifically for art, kind of speed ran this game, and I think that's just how you're supposed to play.
Yeah, that's probably what the intention was for the developers. Like, they want to build an environment that's fun and promotes that flow state of gameplay. Like, but they still want to have nice visuals, but it's not like their as much of a primary concern as like gameplay and keeping the intensity at a good balance.
So
yeah, well, I think that's.
I
was just gonna.
Go ahead and finish. I have another discussion to
Obviously,
open up here.
I was gonna talk about the gameplay. Apologies, but I was just saying, like, I think that's a part of the reason that a lot of these characters can be killed with either one hit, or you hit them once to stun them, and then you kill them like immediately after. Is to kind of play into that idea of you're supposed to be running through these levels as fast as possible, like, So
Well, if
the
you
game
stop,
doesn't
you
have-
die.
If you stop, you die. So for the game, like, you don't have time to sit around killing one enemy. No. Like, you gotta move. And so I kind of like how the enemy design plays into like the gameplay loop. I think it does a good job at it.
I also like how there's a good variation between ranged close quarters and then more strong close quarters enemies, and then you can also utilize the projectiles against the enemy, but only if you're exceptionally skilled. I think that's where the low skill floor, high skill ceiling comes in, is like if you're really good at this game, you are throwing the bullets right back into those enemies' faces and nothing can stop you. And I think in these later levels, Anthony kind of figured that out, and he became a total badass ninja. And I think that's like probably the best feeling in the game, is when you realize that and you just start kicking ass. It just makes it so much fun to play. And then when you beat it, you just want to play it again because you had so much fun in those later levels, and now you want to go back to the beginning and be badass again, right? And that's the replayability feature there.
I hate myself. I knew that was coming up. I was just like, yep, I remember that. That's terrible. I was so happy though I didn't have to redo everything there. So it's a little forgiving.
Definitely wouldn't have happened if this game came out in 95.
Nope,
Yeah,
you
I
would have
mean, if
lost.
there was a life system to this game, I don't think I would have really enjoyed it.
I
'cause
never
there
would
was
have played
something
past
about
the first level.
Yeah,
I don't think many of us would have.
I think it was Ninja Gaiden, and it was clunky.
Okay, Ninja Gaiden was simultaneously like okay and also just terrible about its difficulty, because you did have infinite continues, but if you lost all your lives, you had to start the stage all over. And for the final 3 levels of the game, if you lose all of your lives at any point, you have to restart the entire final 3 levels. So it kind of throws out that little bit of forgiving, like the little bit of forgiving gameplay mechanics that's throughout the rest of the title, just kind of gone.
I'm sorry, I just wouldn't play it at that point. If I can't probably play retro games because I would get so frustrated if I had to restart an entire stage. Like, Mario is the extent for me, and they have a halfway point.
Yeah.
And
even Mario, like,
I don't think that the modern gamer is patient enough anymore for that either.
Well, I just don't think it's great game design to have to constantly go through. I mean, it was good for the developers because it meant that you would be playing their games for longer, so you'd be like mastering mechanics like naturally over time. Like, there is definitely benefits to that style of gameplay.
But I think you're shutting off a massive number of your player base with that technique, which is why it's outdated game design.
There's a reason Dark Souls doesn't have lives,
Like, there's a reason I don't play Dark Souls.
Man, Dark Souls is a fun game.
You guys were talking about, you were like, oh, if this game came out in 1995, and it was interesting thinking about it because this game could only exist now because I got to thinking like, okay, you'd have to take something away, either the cinematic element of all these awesome sprites running around and blood spurting, you either have to keep that or the gameplay would not be as tight because like, obviously it'd be a bit more laggy in the input if there's way more sprites to load.
Yeah.
Or you'd have the inverse where you make it all cinematic, or you have it where the gameplay is the same, but you lose all the cinematic stuff. So it's really like, because I'm thinking about Heart of Darkness, which was like cutting edge pixel art at the time. It was like a platformer, but good God, going back to those controls, like if this game played like Heart of Darkness did, it wouldn't be very good.
Yeah, well, Heart of Darkness is a good-looking game, but from what I've seen of people playing it, it doesn't seem like it's an actually fun
Yeah, cinematic.
game to play.
And this is coming from the
Very
guy who
cinematic.
purposely plays games that punish their player base, like Sekiro, Dark Souls, and I don't what else games that are hard. Xavier likes games that are hard.
I do like difficulty in games, but Heart of Darkness is not. It's not good difficult. When
It's
the
not fair.
controls are, yeah, it's not fair because the controls are what makes it difficult, and that makes it so it's not fun to play. Because Sekiro's hard because the gameplay is difficult, but actually controlling Sekiro is fine. I don't know if I could say that about the main character of Heart of Darkness. I mean, I haven't played it for myself, but just like looking at others playing, it seems like a real struggle.
That's the awesome thing about this is that they didn't have to make a sacrifice. They get to have it be cinematic, and also the gameplay gets to be quick. And
Yeah.
that's why development's so exciting now because you don't have to sacrifice anything. You
Yeah.
just get to choose what you give and what you take.
I know I've always wanted to make a pixel art game, but I can't draw, so that's like my main holdback is I'm a programmer, and I just cannot put it through my brain to draw, and pixel art's like a whole new level because it's got to be like I think that what a lot of people don't understand about pixel art is that it has to be really dead on when you're doing it because it's really easy to tell when it's bad. Whereas when
It's
it
just
comes
like capturing small details with
Yeah.
limited like
limited
colors
screen
and
space, yeah.
pixels. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas when it comes to a 3D game or like 3D assets, there's a lot more we can fudge. Like you don't have to be the best 2D artist to be good at 3D. Because especially now with Houdini, we can just procedurally generate rocks that look good. But I that's like my biggest holdup when I was thinking about designing a game similar to this was like, oh my god, I need to hire an artist. I couldn't do it myself. I could program the interactions, but no way could I do the art.
I think as long as the colors read, like, okay, looking at this scene might be hard to tell, but like they purposely made, I would assume, zero sprite.
Sorry, what was that, Granger? Oh,
I'm just saying, like, they like the scale of the pixels makes it so zero sprite. If you separate it from the game, it's a pretty small sprite. But when they did that, they opened up like, okay, we can revise his sprite for lighting. So he's standing under a white light now. There's white on top of his sprite. Standing next to the TV. The TV glows onto the sprite. And small details like that could only really happen feasibly if it was a smaller sprite. So maybe it doesn't even have to look all that great. Just having an eye for detail, you can do a lot, even if you're not like the best 2D artist.
that's what you just explained too is what a lot of amateurs miss with games in general, and or visual when they do like special visual effects edits, is they miss the way lights reflect onto the characters they're inserting into the scene or props in the scene, and that's one of the biggest issues when you're learning how to be a game artist is understanding how the lighting of the world affects what you've placed into it.
Yeah, like reality over realism. Like even if it's a stylized looking world, I would assume that like light operates the same way.
Light
in
should
capturing
always
detail.
light should always
Yeah.
operate the same way, and that's like a big thing with VR is we have to use static lighting, so having lights change correctly is super difficult because we can't cast new lights onto things when they move.
Yeah, and you're seeing with your own eyes, probably you can't get away with as much because you're just in the environment.
Yeah, whereas this, I mean, I feel like optimization for an 8-bit game has to be a lot easier than optimization for a 3D game. Like,
Yeah.
I'm assuming that. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, but...
No, yeah, you're right. I mean, you can load images incredibly quickly with computers now, so I don't think like unless you programmed it very poorly, I would assume they didn't run into too many problems with like chugging unless they were on pretty archaic hardware.
What would you say is the main development tools that someone would use if they wanted to get into creating games like this? Like I'm talking their art software, because they wouldn't be using Maya. So, like, what software would you recommend, and what engine would you recommend?
The elders, they use Photoshop, which works. Us hip young kids, we use Ace Bright. And most people I know who do pixel art now on Twitter and stuff, that they use Ace Bright because that's the quickest way. You set the scale, you can choose colors, you can make your own palette. It's pretty open. It would be hard, I think, if someone didn't know much about pixel art and they picked it up, but it's a good, simple tool, and it has good export options, a very good developer who communicates pretty good, updates it regularly, and it's not like Adobe where you have to pay every month. It's just you buy it once.
I'll make sure to link that in the chat for everyone who's interested.
It's an awesome tool. I don't know exactly, I mean, outside of the pixel art community, how popular it is, but like it's really helped me a lot because I used to just use Photoshop, and Photoshop's all fine and dandy, but it's not really built for this.
Yeah, definitely. Because you know you're working with images that have 300 pixel resolution. So, by the way, we are at the end of our stream, so we're just gonna make a few announcements and then we'll end it. But Granger, I'd like to thank you a lot for coming on the show, and for everyone who's still watching, I put a lot of Granger's social links, so his Instagram where he's got actual pixel art up, and his ArtStation portfolio where he has some of his more recent game art projects, as he is a game artist at the same school that we all go to, which is Ringling College of Art and Design. So if you want to take a look at Granger's stuff, just go down to the description and click the links, and you can see his really cool art. You've got some cool stuff on there, so let's get some attention on it, right? And then a quick announcement. So next week, we will not be doing the stream due to the fact that Ringling is having a Game Art Senior show, and our guest for next week has to be a part of that. So we're going to have to cancel the show, and we're going to be taking a 2-week hiatus because we're going to be finishing up our semester here at Ringling and moving back home. So we'll continue the show 2 weeks after this current date with a new season focusing on kind of a different type of game. So we'll have a guest next that week, hopefully, and we'll be focusing on some other types of things, as well as focusing a little bit harder into converting regular games into virtual reality. But Granger, I really appreciate you being here for the stream. Anthony as well, and Joe and Xavier, thank you so much. And to my co-hosts, this first season of our podcast went really well, and we're all excited to come back for another season after the 2-week break. A few more announcements, just YouTube-wise in general. I've got 3 new tutorials up, one on developing for the Oculus Quest 2, which I've mentioned in the last 2 podcasts. A new one on getting started with the MetaHuman Creator. If anyone's interested in that, you can go directly into my YouTube channel, and you'll see the MetaHuman Creator tutorial there. And then we also have another tutorial that's just setting up with a different method of source control, which is GitHub. So that's a free source control software you can use to get your projects up and running with Unreal Engine and GitHub, so you can share with your team and create games together. So with that being said, if there's any more announcements that anyone in the chat would like to make that I may have missed, please say so.
No, I can't think of anything.
All right, well,